The radar screen at Forward Operating Base Kandahar showed nothing but empty sky. General Marcus Rothwell stood behind the air traffic controllers, his weathered hands clasped behind his back, watching the green sweep of the radar arm paint circles of nothing across the monitor. The operators had been scanning for 3 hours, searching for any sign of Bravo 74, the A-10 Thunderbolt that had gone silent during a close air support mission in the Helmand Valley. "Sir, we've got search and rescue birds in the air, but no transponder signal, no emergency beacon," Staff Sergeant Rodriguez reported, his voice tight with concern. Last radio contact was at 1400 hours, approximately 40 clicks northeast of here. Rothwell's jaw tightened. He'd been in this position too many times before, staring at empty screens while good pilots remained unaccounted for. But this one felt different. The pilot of Bravo 74 wasn't just any aviator, it was Captain Nix Valerius, call sign Raven, a pilot whose reputation preceded her like thunder before lightning. Some called her reckless. Others whispered she was the best close air support pilot to ever strap into an A-10's ejection seat. The general had his doubts. 3 weeks ago, during a heated briefing, he'd questioned her aggressive tactics, suggesting that perhaps she was trying too hard to prove herself in a male-dominated squadron. The words had hung in the briefing room like smoke from a burnt offering, and Raven's steel-gray eyes had locked onto his with an intensity that made seasoned colonels shift uncomfortably in their chairs. "With respect, sir," she had said, her voice steady as a sniper's breath, "the enemy doesn't care about proving points. They care about staying alive. My job is to make sure our ground troops go home." Now, as the autumn sun cast long shadows across the Afghan landscape, those words echoed in Rothwell's mind. The radio crackled with search updates, each negative report deepening the silence that had settled over the operations center like a funeral shroud. Then, at precisely 1547 hours, Airman First Class Thompson's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Sir, I've got something." His finger trembled slightly as it pointed to a faint blip appearing on the edge of the radar screen. Single aircraft, low altitude, heading southwest. No IFF signal, no radio contact. The room fell silent except for the hum of electronics and the distant rumble of generators. General Rothwell leaned forward, squinting at the screen. The blip moved with the distinctive slow, steady pace of an A-10, but something was wrong. The aircraft was flying far too low, barely skimming the mountainous terrain at an altitude that would make even experienced pilots break into a cold sweat. "Get me visual confirmation," Rothwell ordered, his voice carrying the weight of command and barely concealed worry. Captain Miranda Torres adjusted her F-16's heading, banking slightly to intercept the mysterious aircraft that had appeared on everyone's scopes like a ghost materializing from thin air. As an experienced pilot herself, Torres knew the reputation that preceded the missing A-10 pilot. Raven was either dead or about to prove every skeptic wrong in the most spectacular way possible. "Control, this is Falcon 1-2. I have visual contact with the unknown aircraft," Torres transmitted, her voice steady despite what she was seeing through her HUD. The A-10 Thunderbolt II emerged from the heat haze like something from a fever dream, its distinctive twin engines and straight wings immediately recognizable. But as she closed the distance, details became horrifyingly clear. The aircraft's canopy was spiderwebbed with cracks, chunks of plexiglass missing entirely, creating a mosaic of destruction that should have made flight impossible. Hydraulic fluid streamed from multiple punctures in the fuselage, creating rainbow-colored contrails against the harsh Afghan sky. The left engine cowling bore scorch marks from what appeared to be a direct hit, yet somehow the Pratt & Whitney turbofan continued its reassuring rumble. "Jesus Christ," Torres whispered, forgetting radio protocol entirely. "Control, Bravo 74 is flying with a completely shattered canopy. I can see the pilot, she's conscious, hands on the controls, but there's blood on her flight suit." In the operations center, General Rothwell felt his chest tighten. Through the static-filled radio transmission, He could hear something he'd rarely encountered in 30 years of military service, genuine awe in a seasoned pilot's voice. Torres wasn't just reporting aircraft damage. She was witnessing something that defied conventional understanding of what was survivable in combat aviation. The A-10 continued its approach to Kandahar, maintaining perfect formation discipline despite flying what amounted to an open cockpit at altitude. Every slight course correction was precise, professional, executed with the kind of skill that separated competent pilots from legends. The aircraft's battle damage told a story of survival against impossible odds, but its flight characteristics suggested something more: a pilot who had transcended the limitations of both machine and mortal flesh. Falcon 1-2, can you establish communication with Bravo 7-4? Came the urgent transmission from base operations. Torres switched to the emergency frequency, her own hands slightly trembling as she keyed the microphone. Bravo 7-4, this is Falcon 1-2 on guard. Please respond if able. The response came through layers of static and wind noise, but the voice was unmistakably feminine, calm, and edged with something that might have been dark humor. Falcon 1-2, Raven here. Canopy's a bit drafty today, but the coffee's still hot. General Rothwell closed his eyes, a mixture of relief and something approaching reverence washing over him. The emergency vehicles lined Kandahar's main runway like steel sentinels, their red and white lights painting urgent patterns across the tarmac as the damaged A-10 approached for landing. Fire trucks, ambulances, and recovery vehicles created a corridor of safety, their crews standing at attention, every man and woman knowing they were about to witness either a miracle or a tragedy. Bravo 7-4, you are cleared for emergency landing, runway 27, the tower controller transmitted, his usually professional voice betraying underlying tension. Emergency vehicles are standing by. Wind is calm, visibility unlimited. Through the shattered remains of her canopy, Captain Nix Valerius could feel the desert wind tearing at her helmet and flight suit with fingers of ice and sand. Her left shoulder throbbed where shrapnel had found its way past her body armor, and dried blood had formed a crust along her jawline where flying glass had drawn its own map of survival. But her hands remained steady on the controls, her feet firm on the rudder pedals, her mind calculating approach angles with the precision of a mathematician solving elegant equations. The A-10 responded to her touch like a wounded animal that still trusted its master. Despite losing primary hydraulics, despite flying with what amounted to no canopy at all, despite battle damage that should have sent the aircraft spiraling into the Hindu Kush Mountains, the Thunderbolt maintained its reputation for being nearly indestructible. The General Electric GAU-8 cannon beneath the fuselage had expended its ammunition hours ago, protecting a pinned-down Army patrol, but the aircraft's titanium bathtub cockpit had done its job, keeping Raven alive through an engagement that would have destroyed lesser aircraft and killed lesser pilots. Tower, Bravo 7-4 on final approach, Raven transmitted, her voice carrying across the radio waves with an eerie calm that made seasoned controllers pause in their duties. Aircraft is controllable, pilot is conscious and alert, requesting immediate debriefing with intelligence once I'm on the ground. We've got actionable intel on enemy positions that won't stay fresh. In the operations center, General Rothwell felt something shift in his understanding of leadership and capability. 3 weeks ago, he had questioned this pilot's judgment, had suggested she was trying too hard to prove herself worthy of flying combat missions. Now, listening to her prioritize mission intelligence, even while bringing home a shot-up aircraft through sheer force of will and skill, he realized his assessment had been fundamentally flawed. The A-10's main landing gear touched the runway with barely a chirp of rubber against concrete, the kind of soft landing that demonstrated absolute mastery of aircraft control. As the aircraft rolled down the center line, emergency vehicles paced alongside, their crews ready to respond to any sign of trouble. But Raven needed no assistance, guiding the damaged Thunderbolt to a complete stop with the same precision she'd maintained throughout the flight home. The Canopy emergency jettison system had been damaged beyond use, so ground crews scrambled with manual tools to free the pilot from her cockpit. As they worked, Raven continued transmitting intelligence reports, describing enemy positions, troop movements, and weapons emplacements with the detached professionalism of someone who had just returned from hell and was concerned primarily with ensuring others didn't have to make the same trip. When the maintenance chief finally pulled away the twisted remains of the Canopy frame, Captain Nix Valerius emerged from the cockpit like a warrior goddess stepping down from Mount Olympus. Blood streaked her face, her flight suit was torn in 3 places, and her helmet bore scars from flying metal, but her gray eyes burned with an intensity that made hardened sergeants step back instinctively. She had not merely survived an impossible situation. She had dominated it, bent it to her will, and returned home with information that would save American lives. General Rothwell watched from the operations center window as medical personnel approached the pilot, only to be waved away as she insisted on walking to debriefing under her own power. Her movements were precise, controlled, betraying no weakness despite the obvious trauma she had endured. This was not a pilot trying to prove herself, he realized. This was a pilot who had already proven everything that mattered, and was now focused solely on the mission and the lives of fellow warriors. The intelligence briefing room at Forward Operating Base Kandahar had seen countless debriefings, but none quite like this. Captain Nix Valerius sat at the metal table, her flight suit still stained with hydraulic fluid and blood, declining medical attention until she had delivered every piece of actionable intelligence she had gathered during her extended reconnaissance mission behind enemy lines. Her voice never wavered as she described coordinates, enemy strength assessments, and weapon positions with the clinical precision of a surgeon describing anatomy. Grid reference November Victor 784562, enemy mortar position, approximately 8 personnel, dug in on the reverse slope of Hill 438, she reported, her steel-gray eyes focused on the digital map display. They've got excellent fields of fire covering the valley floor, and they're the ones who have been hitting our supply convoys for the past 2 weeks. Colonel James Patterson, the base intelligence officer, found himself taking notes as quickly as his pen would allow. In 15 minutes, Raven had provided more accurate enemy intelligence than his entire staff had gathered in the previous month. Her photographic memory and tactical awareness transformed what should have been a routine pilot recovery into an intelligence goldmine that would reshape their understanding of enemy operations in the region. Captain, you mentioned earlier that your aircraft took significant damage during the engagement. Can you walk us through what happened up there? Patterson asked, genuinely curious how any pilot had survived what appeared to be a direct hit from anti-aircraft artillery. Raven's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes, not fear or trauma, but the kind of cold calculation that separated combat veterans from everyone else. I was providing close air support for Army units pinned down by coordinated enemy fire. During my 3rd gun run, Zu-23 anti-aircraft artillery opened up from a concealed position. One round impacted the canopy frame, another penetrated the left engine cowling. Standard evasive maneuvers, continued mission until ordnance was expended, and friendly forces were able to withdraw to safe positions. The matter-of-fact way she described flying a combat mission with a destroyed cockpit and engine damage made everyone in the room pause. This wasn't bravado or false heroics. This was a professional describing her job with the same detached competence that others might use to discuss filing paperwork or conducting maintenance inspections. General Rothwell entered the briefing room quietly, taking a position near the back wall where he could observe without interrupting the intelligence-gathering process. He had come to apologize, to acknowledge his error in judgment, but found himself instead witnessing something far more significant than personal redemption. He was watching a master craftsman describe her art, a warrior poet recounting an epic that would be told in ready rooms and officer clubs for decades to come. The enemies adapted their tactics, Raven continued, marking additional positions on the digital map with practiced efficiency. They're using multiple firing positions, coordinated timing, and improved camouflage. Our previous intelligence assessments underestimated both their numbers and their capability. I recommend immediate airstrikes on these positions before they can relocate. Her recommendations were implemented within 6 hours, resulting in the destruction of enemy positions that had plagued coalition forces for months. But more than tactical success, something had shifted in the way people looked at Captain Nix Valerius. The maintenance chief approached the damaged A-10 with the reverence usually reserved for war memorials and religious artifacts. Master Sergeant Alina Kowalski had been working on military aircraft for 23 years, had seen battle damage from Iraq, Afghanistan, and countless training accidents, but nothing had prepared her for the aircraft that Captain Valerius had somehow brought home in one piece. "Sweet mother of pearl," she whispered, running her flashlight beam across the punctured fuselage and shattered canopy frame. The titanium armor surrounding the cockpit bore scars from multiple impacts, yet had held together well enough to keep the pilot alive through what should have been a fatal encounter with anti-aircraft artillery. Hydraulic lines had been severed, electrical systems damaged, and the left engine showed clear evidence of foreign object damage. Yet somehow the aircraft had maintained controlled flight for over 200 miles. Technical Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, Kowalski's lead mechanic, climbed up onto the aircraft's wing to get a better look at the canopy damage. What he found defied his understanding of structural engineering and aerodynamics. The plexiglass had been completely destroyed in some areas, creating massive holes that should have made high-altitude flight impossible due to decompression and wind forces. Yet somehow, the pilot had maintained control, navigation, and communication throughout an extended flight home. "Sarge, you need to see this," Rodriguez called down, his voice filled with something approaching awe. "The ejection seat never fired. She rode this thing home with the cockpit open to the sky at altitude in combat conditions. I've never seen anything like it." Kowalski climbed up beside her mechanic, examining the ejection seat mechanisms and flight controls with the detailed attention of a forensic investigator. Every system told the same story: a pilot who had chosen to fight rather than abandon her aircraft, who had maintained mission focus despite facing conditions that would have broken lesser aviators. The flight control surfaces showed signs of manual input throughout the engagement, precise adjustments that demonstrated absolute mastery of aircraft handling under extreme stress. Word of the damaged A-10 spread through the base like wildfire carried by desert winds. Off-duty personnel found excuses to walk past the maintenance hangar. Pilots from other squadrons stopped by to examine the battle damage, and even administrative personnel who rarely ventured near the flight line came to witness what many were already calling a miracle of aviation and human determination. But Captain Valerius was notably absent from these informal gatherings. She had completed her intelligence debriefing, submitted her after-action report, and disappeared into the quiet spaces that warriors seek when they need to process experiences that exist beyond the boundaries of normal human understanding. Some said she was sleeping off the effects of combat stress. Others suggested she was already planning her next mission, studying intelligence reports and weather forecasts with the obsessive attention to detail that separated good pilots from legendary ones. The truth was simpler and more complex than base rumors suggested. Nix Valerius sat alone in the base chapel, not praying in any conventional sense, but seeking the kind of silence that allows the human soul to process experiences that exist at the intersection of mortality and transcendence. She had looked death in the face and found it wanting, had danced with forces that should have claimed her life, and had emerged not unscathed but fundamentally unchanged in her core identity as a warrior and protector. The flight surgeon's report would note minor injuries, combat stress reactions, and recommendations for mandatory rest periods. But those who understood the deeper aspects of combat leadership recognized something different. A pilot who had crossed a threshold from which there was no return, who had earned a place in the pantheon of warriors whose names would be spoken with reverence long after their wars had ended. The secure video conference connected Forward Operating Base Kandahar with Pentagon briefing rooms, where generals and defense officials leaned forward in their chairs to hear first-hand accounts of what was already being called the most significant single-pilot intelligence-gathering mission of the Afghan conflict. The connection crackled with satellite delay, but Captain Valerius' voice came through clearly as she briefed senior leadership on enemy capabilities and tactical adaptations. The intelligence gathered during Captain Valerius' mission has resulted in 17 successful airstrikes against previously unknown enemy positions. General Sarah Chen reported from the Pentagon, her voice carrying across the secure connection with barely concealed admiration. Her tactical observations have fundamentally altered our understanding of enemy operations in the Helmand Valley region. General Rothwell found himself in the unusual position of defending a pilot he had questioned just weeks earlier. "Sir, Captain Valerius demonstrated exceptional judgment under extraordinary circumstances. Her decision to continue the mission despite severe aircraft damage resulted in actionable intelligence that has already saved American lives." The questions from Washington were pointed, professional, and tinged with the kind of curiosity that senior officers reserve for discussing truly exceptional military performance. How had she maintained aircraft control with a destroyed Canopy? How had she navigated without primary flight instruments? How had she gathered detailed intelligence while simultaneously fighting for her life? Raven answered each question with the same professional detachment she had maintained throughout her debriefing, never embellishing, never seeking credit, focusing entirely on tactical and technical aspects of the mission. Her responses painted a picture of a pilot who had transcended normal human limitations through training, skill, and an almost supernatural dedication to mission accomplishment. "The aircraft performed within acceptable parameters despite battle damage," she reported. "Manual flight controls remained responsive, engine performance was degraded but sufficient, navigation was accomplished using backup instruments and visual references. The mission continued until ordnance was expended and ground units were able to withdraw to safe positions." What she didn't mention, what couldn't be captured in official reports or technical specifications, was the moment when she had chosen to stay with the aircraft rather than eject. The decision had been instantaneous, instinctive, born from a warrior's understanding that some battles require a level of commitment that exists beyond rational calculation. She had looked at her destroyed Canopy, felt the wind and desert sand tearing at her face, and had simply adjusted her grip on the controls and continued flying. The psychological evaluation would note symptoms consistent with combat stress, recommendations for counseling and medical observation, but would miss the essential transformation that had occurred in the cockpit of a damaged A-10 over the Afghan mountains. Raven had discovered something about herself that transcended normal human limitations, had found reserves of strength and determination that existed in the spaces between mortal flesh and immortal spirit. The video conference concluded with commendations, medal recommendations, and discussions of future assignments, but the real significance of the mission couldn't be captured in official documentation. Word was already spreading through military aviation communities worldwide, carried by the informal networks that connect pilots across service branches and international boundaries. In ready rooms from naval air stations to Air Force bases, in officer clubs and pilot lounges, the story was being told with the kind of reverent detail usually reserved for discussing legendary figures from military history. The morning briefing at Kandahar's Operations Center had taken on an almost ceremonial quality since Raven's return. Pilots who had previously regarded her with professional skepticism now listened to her tactical assessments, with the attention usually reserved for reviewing Holy Scripture. Her call sign, once whispered with hints of doubt about a female pilot's capabilities in combat roles, was now spoken with a reverence that bordered on mythological. Major Thomas Brennan, the squadron's operations officer, found himself deferring to Raven's judgment on mission planning and tactical considerations. Captain Valerius, your assessment of enemy anti-aircraft capabilities in Grid Square 74 Alpha, he asked, knowing that her intelligence had proven more accurate than satellite reconnaissance and signals intelligence combined. They've moved the ZU-23 positions approximately 200 meters east of the original coordinates, she replied, marking the updated positions on the digital map with the precision of someone who had personally observed every detail while being shot at. Recommend approaching from the north, using the ridge line as cover until final attack heading. They're expecting attacks from the south based on our previous mission profiles. The other pilots in the briefing room took notes, as if receiving instruction from a master craftsman, which in many ways they were. Raven's tactical knowledge had been earned through direct experience with enemy capabilities, paid for with blood and hydraulic fluid, and the kind of courage that transforms ordinary military personnel into legends. Lieutenant Jennifer Walsh, the squadron's newest pilot, raised her hand tentatively. "Ma'am, when you were flying with the damaged Canopy, how did you manage navigation and communication with all that wind noise and debris?" Raven's steel-gray eyes softened slightly, recognizing a young pilot's genuine desire to learn rather than satisfy curiosity about her ordeal. Primary flight instruments were functional, GPS navigation remained operational. Communication required speaking slowly and clearly, using proper radio procedure. The wind noise was significant, but not insurmountable with proper technique and equipment. What she didn't mention was the way the desert wind had felt like the breath of ancient gods, the way flying without a canopy had connected her to the fundamental nature of flight in ways that enclosed cockpits could never replicate. She had become one with the aircraft, with the sky, with the eternal dance between human ambition and natural forces that defines aviation at its most elemental level. The briefing concluded with weather updates, intelligence summaries, and maintenance reports, but the real education was happening in the spaces between official information. Young pilots were learning that competence and courage weren't gendered characteristics, that leadership emerged from demonstrated capability rather than preconceived assumptions, and that true warriors were defined by their actions under pressure rather than their conformity to traditional expectations. General Rothwell had scheduled a private meeting with Captain Valerius, not for disciplinary action or formal counseling, but for the kind of conversation that occurs between military professionals who have witnessed something that transcends normal operational experience. He had apologized, acknowledged his error in judgment, and received her forgiveness with the grace that characterized her approach to all aspects of military service. But more than personal redemption, their conversation had revealed the deeper implications of her actions. She had not simply survived an impossible situation. She had demonstrated that the future of military aviation belonged to those with the skill and determination to transcend traditional limitations, regardless of gender, background, or preconceived notions about who belonged in combat roles. The medal ceremony took place 3 weeks later, with full military honors and representatives from every branch of service. The Distinguished Flying Cross was presented by a general who had flown combat missions in 3 different conflicts, and who recognized in Captain Valerius the kind of warrior who defined the highest traditions of military aviation. But for those who understood the deeper significance of her actions, the real ceremony had taken place in the cockpit of a damaged A-10, when she had chosen to continue flying rather than abandon her mission, when she had transformed herself from a competent pilot into something approaching aviation mythology. The letter arrived on official Pentagon stationery, bearing the seal of the Secretary of Defense and the kind of language usually reserved for communications with senior officers and Medal of Honor recipients. Captain Nix Valerius read it twice before the full implications registered, her expression remaining characteristically composed despite the magnitude of the opportunity being offered. The Department of Defense requests your participation in the Advanced Tactical Fighter Pilot Program. She read aloud to her empty quarters, her voice barely audible above the constant hum of generators and air conditioning units that provided the soundtrack to life at Forward Operating Base Kandahar. This program represents the next evolution in military aviation, combining cutting-edge technology with the highest levels of pilot capability and tactical expertise. The program description outlined opportunities to test experimental aircraft, develop new combat tactics, and train the next generation of military aviators. It was the kind of assignment that ambitious pilots spent entire careers trying to achieve, the pinnacle of professional recognition in the military aviation community. Her performance over Afghanistan had apparently impressed officials at the highest levels of government, earning her a place among the elite few selected for roles that would shape the future of American air power. But reading the letter in her small quarters, surrounded by the personal possessions that marked a life dedicated to military service, Raven found herself thinking not about career advancement or professional recognition, but about the young pilots in her squadron who still asked questions about flight techniques and combat tactics, with the eager hunger of students seeking wisdom from a master. Lieutenant Walsh had approached her just yesterday, asking for advice about handling emergency procedures and combat stress. Technical Sergeant Rodriguez had requested her input on maintenance protocols for battle-damaged aircraft. Even General Rothwell had begun seeking her tactical assessments for mission planning, recognizing that her combat experience provided insights that couldn't be gained through staff training or theoretical study. The choice represented more than a career decision. It was a question of identity and purpose that went to the heart of what it meant to serve as a military officer. The Pentagon assignment offered prestige, advancement, and the opportunity to influence military aviation at the highest levels. But staying at Kandahar meant continuing to serve alongside the pilots and ground crews who had become her military family, continuing to fly the missions that protected American ground forces, continuing to embody the kind of leadership that inspired others to exceed their own expectations of what was possible. She thought about the moment in her damaged cockpit when she had chosen to continue flying rather than eject, the decision that had transformed her from a skilled pilot into something approaching legend. That choice had been driven not by ambition or career considerations, but by dedication to mission accomplishment and protection of fellow warriors. The same principles that had guided that decision would guide this one. The response she drafted was brief, professional, and characteristic of her approach to all aspects of military service. She thanked the Secretary of Defense for the honor of being selected, acknowledged the prestige of the program, and respectfully declined the assignment, citing her commitment to current operational responsibilities and her belief that her skills could be better utilized supporting combat operations in Afghanistan. The real reason was simpler and more complex than her official response suggested. She had found her place in the warrior hierarchy, not as someone seeking advancement or recognition, but as a protector and teacher, a living example of what was possible when skill, courage, and dedication combined in service of something greater than personal ambition. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the flight line at Forward Operating Base Kandahar as Captain Nix Valerius completed her pre-flight inspection of the newly repaired A-10 Thunderbolt. The aircraft bore no visible scars from her previous adventure, the maintenance crews having restored it to factory specifications, with the kind of attention to detail that military mechanics reserve for aircraft that have earned legendary status through combat performance. Master Sergeant Kowalski approached with the aircraft's maintenance log, her weathered face breaking into something that might have been a smile. "She's ready to fly, Captain. New canopy, overhauled engines, every system tested and certified. Probably flies better now than when she rolled off the production line." Raven accepted the logbook, scanning the maintenance entries with the thorough attention that had kept her alive through dozens of combat missions. Every signature, every inspection stamp, every technical note told the story of skilled professionals who took personal pride in ensuring that warriors returned home safely from their appointed tasks. "How's the new hydraulic system performing?" she asked, running her hand along the wing surface with the familiarity of someone who understood that aircraft were more than machines. They were partners in the ancient dance between human ambition and the unforgiving laws of physics. "Pressure's holding steady, response time is within specifications. Backup systems all check good," Kowalski replied, her voice carrying the confidence that comes from 30 years of keeping military aircraft operational in environments where mechanical failure meant death. "She's ready for whatever you've got planned up there." The mission briefing had been routine, close air support for Army units conducting patrol operations in the Helmand Valley, the same type of mission that Raven had flown hundreds of times before. But routines had taken on different meaning since her encounter with mortality and transcendence over the Afghan mountains. Every flight now carried the weight of accumulated wisdom, every mission an opportunity to demonstrate the kind of leadership that inspired others to exceed their own limitations. Lieutenant Walsh appeared at her elbow, flight gear perfectly arranged, her young face serious with the responsibility of flying wing position for a pilot whose reputation had grown beyond base boundaries into the realm of military legend. "Ma'am, weather's clear, friendlies are in position, target area is secure for our ingress." Raven nodded, recognizing in the younger pilot's professional demeanor the same hunger for excellence that had driven her own development from competent aviator to something approaching warrior poet. "Remember, Walsh, close air support isn't about demonstrating our capabilities. It's about ensuring ground units complete their mission and return home safely. We're tools in service of a larger purpose." The walk to the aircraft felt different now, charged with the accumulated weight of experience and reputation. Ground crews stopped their activities to watch as Raven and Walsh approached their aircraft, not out of curiosity, but out of recognition that they were witnessing the continuation of a story that had already entered military folklore. The pre-flight ritual proceeded with the methodical precision that characterizes professional aviation, but underneath the familiar routine lay deeper currents of meaning and purpose. Every switch position, every instrument check, every radio call connected to the broader tapestry of military service and the warrior tradition that extends back through centuries of human conflict. As Raven strapped herself into the cockpit of the repaired A-10, she felt the familiar sensation of merging with the machine, of becoming part of a weapons system designed to protect and serve those who could not protect themselves. The ejection seat that had remained unused during her previous adventure now seemed like an old friend, a final option that would always be available but would hopefully never be required. The engines spooled up with their characteristic whine, hydraulic systems came online with reassuring precision, and flight instruments aligned themselves with the mathematical certainty that governs all successful aviation. But beyond the technical perfection lay something more significant, the knowledge that she was carrying forward a tradition of service that transcended individual achievement and connected her to something eternal and meaningful. The radio crackled with clearance for takeoff, and Captain Nix Valerius, call sign Raven, prepared to write the next chapter in a story that had already transcended the boundaries between military service and mythology, between individual achievement and collective inspiration. The takeoff roll felt like coming home, like returning to a natural state that existed somewhere between earth and sky, between mortal flesh and immortal purpose. The A-10 lifted into the Afghan sky with the grace of a predator bird, carrying its pilot toward whatever challenges awaited in the vast blue spaces above the desert mountains. Below, ground crews watched until the aircraft disappeared into the heat haze, knowing they had witnessed not just another routine departure, but the continuation of a legend that would inspire military aviators for generations to come. In ready rooms and pilot lounges around the world, her story was already being told, passed down through the informal networks that connect warriors across time and space. The sky held infinite possibilities, infinite challenges, infinite opportunities for service and sacrifice. And somewhere in that vast blue expanse, Captain Nix Valerius continued her appointed rounds, protecting those who needed protection, inspiring those who needed inspiration, and embodying the highest traditions of military aviation with every breath she drew and every mile she flew. Her legend was no longer a story about proving herself worthy of flying combat missions. It had evolved into something deeper and more significant, a testament to the transcendent power of skill, courage, and dedication in service of ideals greater than individual ambition. She had become a living symbol of what was possible when human capability was refined through training, tested through adversity, and dedicated to protecting others. The general no longer claimed the sky was empty. He knew better now. He knew that somewhere above the desert mountains, Raven was flying her appointed missions, carrying forward a tradition of service that would endure long after her wars had ended, and her aircraft had been retired to museums where future generations would read her story and dream of touching the sky with equal grace and determination. The legend continued, written in contrails and radio transmissions, in the quiet respect of fellow warriors, and in the knowledge that some people are born to fly, born to serve, born to demonstrate that human capability has no meaningful limitations when guided by honor, courage, and love for those who depend on warriors to keep them safe. In the end, the sky had never been empty. It had simply been waiting for someone worthy of filling it.